The bullies had no idea. They just pushed the wrong girl into that hole. Now they'll pay. Kimberly Walker stepped through the rusted gates of Riverside High School, her worn sneakers crunching against the gravel path that led to the imposing brick building. The 15-year-old girl clutched her backpack straps tightly, her knuckles white with tension. Moving to a new town 3 weeks into the semester was bad enough, but arriving at a school that looked like it had seen better days made everything worse. The building's facade showed decades of wear, with ivy crawling up the walls and windows that hadn't been properly cleaned in months. What made it even more intimidating was the massive construction pit that dominated the front courtyard, where workers had begun excavating for a new gymnasium addition. Yellow caution tape surrounded the gaping hole, which dropped down at least 12 feet into muddy, debris-filled darkness. Kimberly was small for her age, barely reaching 5 feet 2 inches, with shoulder-length dark hair that she kept tied back in a simple ponytail. Her clothes were clean but clearly second-hand, and her shy demeanor made her an easy target in any social hierarchy. She had always been quiet, preferring books to people, which had served her well in her previous schools where she could blend into the background. But Riverside High felt different. There was an edge to this place, a tension in the air that made her stomach churn with anxiety. As she navigated the crowded hallways during her first week, Kimberly noticed the social dynamics immediately. Groups of students clustered together like tribes, each claiming their territory in the cafeteria, the courtyard, and the main hallway. The most intimidating group was led by Madison Cross, a 17-year-old girl with bleached blonde hair and a sneer that seemed permanently etched on her face. Madison ruled the school with an iron fist, surrounded by her 2 loyal followers, Jessica Vance, a tall redhead with a cruel laugh, and Brittany Shaw, who, despite being shorter than Madison, compensated with twice the attitude. Together, they formed a trio that other students either worshipped or avoided entirely. Madison had noticed Kimberly on her very first day. Maybe it was the way the new girl kept her head down, or how she ate lunch alone in the corner of the cafeteria. But something about Kimberly's quiet presence irritated Madison. It was as if Kimberly's very existence challenged the established order by refusing to acknowledge it. Madison thrived on attention, on having everyone either love her or fear her, and Kimberly's indifference was unacceptable. The first incident happened during lunch on Kimberly's 3rd day. She was sitting alone at a corner table, reading a worn paperback novel while picking at her sandwich, when Madison and her crew approached. The cafeteria was buzzing with its usual chaos of conversations, laughter, and the clatter of plastic trays. But somehow Kimberly sensed their presence before they even spoke. "Well, what do we have here?" Madison's voice cut through the noise like a blade. "The new girl thinks she's too good to talk to anyone?" Kimberly looked up from her book, her dark eyes meeting Madison's cold blue ones. "I'm just eating lunch," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Jessica laughed, a harsh sound that drew attention from nearby tables. "Just eating lunch," she says. "You know, around here, new kids usually try to make friends. You've been here almost a week and haven't talked to anyone." "Maybe she thinks she's better than us," Brittany chimed in, leaning against Kimberly's table with deliberate aggression. "Is that it, sweetheart? You too good for Riverside High?" Kimberly felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment as other students began to stare. She could handle being ignored, but being the center of attention like this made her skin crawl. "I'm not bothering anyone," she managed to say, her voice still quiet, but with a slight tremor that betrayed her nervousness. Madison reached across the table and flicked Kimberly's book out of her hands. It tumbled to the floor, its pages splaying open. "Oops," Madison said with mock concern. "How clumsy of me." The humiliation stung, but Kimberly simply bent down to retrieve her book, hoping they would lose interest and move on. She had learned long ago that reacting only made things worse. But as she reached for the book, Brittany stepped on it, grinding her heel into the pages. "Maybe we should help the new girl make some friends," Madison said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. Can't have her thinking we're unwelcoming. From that day forward, Madison and her crew made Kimberly's life miserable. It started small, knocking books out of her hands in the hallway, cutting in front of her in the lunch line, making loud comments about her clothes or hair when she walked by. Kimberly endured it all in silence, telling herself it would eventually stop if she didn't give them the reaction they wanted. But what her tormentors didn't know was that Kimberly Walker carried secrets that ran deeper than her quiet exterior suggested. Back in her hometown, she had spent 8 years training in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu under her uncle Carlos, a former MMA fighter who had taught her that true strength came not from aggression, but from discipline and control. She could have ended Madison's bullying campaign on the first day with a simple armbar or chokehold, but her uncle's teachings echoed in her mind. Violence should always be the last resort, minha sobrinha. Use your skills only to protect yourself or others when there is no other choice. So Kimberly endured. She endured when Madison tripped her in the hallway, sending her sprawling across the linoleum floor while students laughed and stepped around her. She endured when Jessica dumped chocolate milk on her favorite sweater during lunch, claiming it was an accident. She endured when Brittany started spreading rumors that she smelled bad, causing other students to wrinkle their noses and move away when she sat near them. The bullying escalated as Madison grew frustrated with Kimberly's lack of reaction. During gym class, Madison would accidentally spike volleyballs at Kimberly's head. In chemistry lab, she would bump into Kimberly's workstation, causing experiments to spill. The worst part was that the teachers seemed oblivious or simply chose not to intervene. Mr. Peterson, the gym teacher, would shake his head and tell them to be more careful. Ms. Williams, the chemistry teacher, would sigh and hand Kimberly paper towels to clean up the mess. Kimberly's breaking point came on a grey Friday morning in late October. She had managed to avoid Madison's group for most of the week by changing her routes through the school and eating lunch in the library instead of the cafeteria. But as she walked toward the main entrance after school, she found Madison, Jessica, and Brittany waiting for her near the construction pit. "Going somewhere, loser," Madison called out, her voice carrying across the empty courtyard. Most students had already left for the weekend, leaving the area eerily quiet, except for the distant sound of construction workers packing up their equipment. Kimberly tried to walk around them, but Jessica stepped into her path while Brittany moved to block her other escape route. The three girls formed a semicircle around her, backing her closer to the edge of the construction pit. "We've been thinking," Madison said, her voice taking on a dangerous edge. "You've been here over a month now, and you still act like you're too good for us. That's just not acceptable." "I never said I was too good for anyone," Kimberly replied, her voice steadier than she felt. She could sense the pit behind her, the yellow caution tape brushing against her legs. "But that's exactly how you act," Jessica sneered. "Walking around like you own the place, ignoring everyone, thinking you're so special." "Maybe what you need is a reality check," Brittany added, cracking her knuckles in what was clearly meant to be an intimidating gesture. Kimberly's training kicked in, her body automatically assessing the situation. 3 opponents backed against a dangerous obstacle, no witnesses except the distant construction workers who were too far away to help. Her uncle's voice whispered in her mind, but for the first time she began to wonder if this might be the situation he had warned her about. "I just want to go home," Kimberly said, trying one last time to de-escalate the situation. Madison's face twisted into an ugly smile. "Oh, you want to go home? How about we help you with that?" It happened so fast that Kimberly barely had time to react. All 3 girls rushed her at once, their hands pushing against her shoulders and chest. She felt herself stumbling backward, the caution tape snapping as she crashed through it. For a terrifying moment, she was airborne, falling into the dark pit below. The impact knocked the wind out of her lungs as she hit the muddy bottom of the excavation site. Sharp pieces of concrete and rebar scraped against her arms and legs, and the smell of damp earth and diesel fuel filled her nostrils. Above her, she could hear Madison's laughter echoing off the walls of the pit. "Hope you learned your lesson down there," Madison called out, her voice seeming to come from miles away. "Maybe next time you'll show some respect." As their footsteps faded, Kimberly lay still in the mud, taking inventory of her injuries. Nothing was broken, but she was covered in scrapes and bruises, and her clothes were ruined. More importantly, something inside her had snapped. The careful control she had maintained for weeks, the discipline her uncle had taught her, all of it crumbled in that moment. Getting out of the pit proved easier than expected. The construction crew had left a ladder propped against one wall, probably for easy access during their work. Kimberly climbed out slowly, methodically, her mind already planning what came next. She was done being a victim. She was done taking the high road while Madison and her friends made her life hell, but she wouldn't act immediately. No, she would be smart about this, strategic. She would wait for the perfect moment when they were overconfident and unsuspecting. Her uncle had taught her more than just fighting techniques. He had taught her patience, timing, and the importance of choosing your battles wisely. The weekend gave Kimberly time to plan. She researched the school's layout more thoroughly, identifying all the places where confrontations typically occurred. She practiced her techniques in her bedroom, running through scenarios in her mind. Most importantly, she prepared herself mentally for what was about to happen. Monday morning arrived grey and cold, with the promise of rain in the heavy clouds overhead. Kimberly entered school looking exactly the same as always, quiet, unassuming, easy to overlook. But inside, she felt different. There was a coiled energy in her muscles, a sharpness to her focus that hadn't been there before. Madison's crew found her at her locker during the morning break, as Kimberly had expected they would. They were riding high on their victory from Friday, eager to continue their psychological warfare. Well, look who decided to show up today," Madison said, approaching with her usual swagger. "I was starting to think maybe you'd learned your place and transferred schools," Jessica giggled. "Or maybe she's still stuck in that hole. Did you have to call your mommy to come pull you out?" Kimberly closed her locker door slowly, turning to face them with an expression that seemed unchanged from her usual passive demeanor. But there was something different in her eyes, a glint that Madison didn't quite catch. "I got out fine," Kimberly said simply. "Well, aren't you lucky?" Brittany sneered. "But I don't think you really learned your lesson. Maybe we need to find another way to teach you some respect." This was the moment Kimberly had been waiting for. The hallway was crowded with students heading to their next classes, providing plenty of witnesses. Madison and her friends were overconfident, expecting the same passive response they had always received. "You know what?" Kimberly said, her voice still quiet but carrying a new edge that made a few nearby students pause. "I think I have learned something. I've learned that bullies like you only understand one language." Madison's eyes narrowed. "What did you just say to me?" "I said you're a bully," Kimberly repeated louder this time, "and I'm done letting you push me around." The hallway began to quiet as students sensed the shift in dynamics. Madison's face flushed red with anger and embarrassment at being challenged so publicly. "You little freak," Madison snarled, stepping closer. "I think it's time someone taught you a real lesson." She swung her fist toward Kimberly's face, putting all her anger and frustration behind the punch. It was exactly what Kimberly had been expecting. Time seemed to slow as her training took over. She slipped to the side, letting Madison's momentum carry her forward, then grabbed her wrist and used a simple hip toss to send the older girl crashing to the floor. The hallway erupted in gasps and excited murmurs. Madison hit the linoleum hard, her breath whooshing out in a surprised grunt. Jessica and Brittany stared in shock for a moment before rushing to help their leader. "You're going to pay for that." Jessica screamed, lunging at Kimberly with her fingernails extended like claws. Kimberly caught Jessica's wrist, twisted it behind her back, and swept her legs, sending her face first into a row of lockers with a metallic clang that echoed through the hallway. Jessica slumped to the ground, dazed and groaning. Brittany, seeing her friends down, tried a different approach. She grabbed a heavy textbook from someone's open locker and swung it at Kimberly's head. But Kimberly ducked under the swing, stepped inside Brittany's reach, and delivered a quick jab to her solar plexus. Brittany doubled over, gasping for air, and Kimberly followed up with a knee strike that sent her sprawling backward. The entire confrontation had lasted less than 30 seconds, but the hallway was now completely silent, except for the groans of Madison's crew. Students stared in amazement at the quiet new girl who had just dismantled the school's most feared bullies with clinical efficiency. Madison struggled to her feet, her face a mask of rage and humiliation. "This isn't over," she wheezed, pointing a shaking finger at Kimberly. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life." Kimberly looked at her calmly, no longer the frightened victim who had endured weeks of torment. "No, Madison. The mistake was yours. You picked the wrong girl to mess with." As teachers arrived to break up the crowd and sort out what had happened, Kimberly walked calmly to her next class. Behind her, she could hear the whispers starting, stories of how the quiet new girl had taken down Madison Cross and her entire crew single-handedly. The aftermath was swift and decisive. Principal Harris called all 4 girls to his office, where witness statements painted a clear picture of what had happened. Madison, Jessica, and Brittany faced suspension for instigating the fight and their previous bullying behavior, which other students finally felt safe to report. Kimberly received a warning for fighting but no suspension, as it was clearly self-defense. More importantly, the social dynamics of Riverside High shifted overnight. Students who had previously ignored Kimberly out of fear of Madison's wrath now approached her with newfound respect. Not everyone wanted to be her friend, some were simply afraid of her now. But no one dared to mess with her. Madison tried to salvage her reputation by spreading rumors about Kimberly using dirty fighting or catching them off guard, but the damage was done. She had been publicly humiliated by someone she had considered beneath her notice, and everyone knew it. Her crew fell apart as Jessica and Brittany distanced themselves from their former leader, not wanting to be associated with someone who had lost her power so dramatically. 3 weeks later, Kimberly sat in the same corner of the cafeteria where Madison had first confronted her, but now she wasn't alone. Sarah Martinez, a girl from her English class, sat across from her discussing their upcoming project. At the next table, a group of underclassmen ate their lunch peacefully, no longer afraid of being targeted by Madison's crew. Madison sat at a table on the far side of the cafeteria with only 1 or 2 hangers-on. Her reign of terror effectively ended. She still glared at Kimberly occasionally, but she never approached her again. The threat of another public humiliation was too great. "You know," Sarah said, taking a bite of her sandwich, "I always wondered why you let them push you around for so long. It was obvious you could handle yourself." Kimberly smiled, thinking of her uncle's teachings. "Sometimes you have to try every other option first. Violence should always be the last resort. But when it is the last resort, then you make sure it's decisive," Kimberly replied. That afternoon, as she walked past the construction pit on her way home, Kimberly paused to look down into the hole that had changed everything. The workers had made progress, and what had once seemed like a bottomless pit was now clearly just another step in building something new, just like her life at Riverside High. She had fallen to the bottom, but she had climbed back out stronger than before. And now, instead of being the victim of someone else's story, she was writing her own. The rain that had been threatening all day finally began to fall as Kimberly walked home, but she didn't hurry. She had learned something important about herself in that pit, that she was stronger than she had ever imagined, and that sometimes the only way to earn respect was to demand it. Behind her, Riverside High stood against the grey sky, its windows glowing warm yellow in the gathering dusk. It looked exactly the same as it had on her first day, but for Kimberly Walker, everything had changed. She was no longer the scared new girl who had walked through those gates weeks ago. She was someone who had been tested and had passed that test with flying colors, and if anyone else wanted to test her again, well, they were welcome to try. But they should remember that the quiet ones are often the most dangerous, because they've learned that actions speak louder than words, and that sometimes the only way to stop a bully is to show them exactly what happens when they push the wrong person too far. The construction pit would eventually become a gymnasium where students would learn teamwork and sportsmanship. But for Kimberly, it would always be the place where she learned that sometimes you have to fall down before you can truly stand up.